No matter the occasion, you should be buying your friends and family cards. Snail mail is back, baby.
That's right, and nothing says I'm a good friend like sending a card from 420cards.com.
Hells yeah. 420cards.com, that's cards with a Z, offers affordable, funny cards with a special little holder for the pre-roll of your choice.
Obviously, you have to provide the party favors, wink wink, and there are laws about mailing it, but there's no better way to share the love with your buds.
So visit 420cards.com, that's cards with a Z, and use the code RAIN20 at checkout for a 20% discount.
Make sure your friend's summer isn't a bummer with 420 cards. Baby, yeah.
It's summertime and I'm ready to rest, relax, and catch some rays.
Well, don't forget your sunscreen.
Of course I won't. I also won't forget my Kefla Organics CBD.
Good plan. Kefla Organics is one of my favorite ways to relax and enjoy the benefits of CBD, whether I'm at home with a tea reading some true crime or laying at the beach on my day off.
Kefla Organics is a fair trade, vegan, refined sugar-free CBD company. And at KeflaOrganics.com, you'll find chocolate bars, hot cocoa, chai lattes, and more, making the taking of CBD a lot more enjoyable than a regular tincture.
And Murder in the Rain listeners can get 20% off using the promo code RAIN20.
So follow at Enjoy Kefla on social media and visit KeflaOrganics.com. Use the code RAIN20 at checkout to save 20% while enjoying guilt-free, stress-reducing, sleep-assisting, delicious Kefla Organic CBD products.
I'm Emily Rowney.
And I'm Alicia Holland.
This is Bill Camp, the voice of Forensic Files 2 on HLN, and you're listening to Murder in the Rain.
In our anniversary episode that aired last month, we got to discussing how we most often cover solved cases. Usually these cases have far more documentation, which makes it a whole lot easier to put a podcast episode together. However, we're super passionate about unsolved cases. We discussed early on when we opted to create a podcast that our goal was to contribute. Whether it's spreading the word so that a name stays with the public longer, or perhaps a tip gets called in, or someone can learn something to help keep their family safe, we just want to be actively contributing. And of course, the dream is always to help bring someone home or, solve a case. So because of that, we feel very lucky that we can highlight these types of cases on our Coin AM Extra segment, True Crime Tuesdays, even if there isn't a whole lot of info on them. Alicia, you mentioned maybe putting together episodes where we can take a few of our True Crime Tuesday segments that are bite-sized and create a feature-length podcast episode.
Yeah, we've been lucky enough to cover some of these cases not only on True Crime Tuesday, but on like a Patreon mini episode, or I know some of them we've done full-on episodes on. And so, yeah, kind of doing a hodgepodge, if you will, of these cases that do have less information, but still deserve to be on a platform like this.
I agree. And it's a fantastic idea. We can take them, put them together in an episode because we know we have a further reach with our actual episodes. So that is what I want to do today. This episode is going to feature 2 cases of missing children under incredibly suspicious circumstances. According to the FBI, in 2020, there were 365,348 National Crime Information Center entries for missing children. According to the Polly Klaas Foundation, nearly 90% of missing children have simply misunderstood directions, miscommunicated their plans, are lost, or have run away. 9% are kidnapped by a family member in a custody dispute. 3% are abducted by non-family members, usually during the commission of a crime such as a robbery or a sexual assault. The kidnapper is often someone the child knows. Only about 100 children a year, that's a fraction of 1%, are kidnapped in a stereotypical stranger abduction, the kind we hear about on the news. And about half of those children do come home. So that less than 1% is the one we're most often worried about, right? Stranger danger, the horror stories from the 80s and 90s. That's why we have Amber Alerts. Amber Alerts were created in 1996 after the tragic abduction and murder of 9-year-old Amber Hagerman in Arlington, Texas. Amber was out riding her bike when she was abducted by a stranger. A neighbor witnessed the ordeal and called 911. Days after the search for Amber, her body was discovered in a creek, naked and sexually assaulted. After her murder, the public was in an uproar. They wanted stronger laws against sex offenders, and this ultimately helped to create the Amber Alert system. While inspired by Amber Hagerman, AMBER is an acronym for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response. The introduction of this system has helped by returning over 1,000 children to their families. What I really didn't know about Amber Alerts until recently was that they're intended for children 17 years or younger who are known to be abducted. This means it's not used for runaway children or abandoned children or missing children in suspicious circumstances, but a true confirmed abduction. I think today's cases will garner some thought about that. What I mean is, we're so focused on that less than 1%, but what are we actually doing about the rest of the cases? I can't say I've heard of a program as effective as the Amber Alert system for children that fall under different categories. Children missing under mysterious circumstances. Children like I'm going to talk about today. Richard Lee Haynes Jr., who went by the name Cody, was born on April 16, 1993, to his parents Richard Lee Haynes Sr., known as Rick, and Lisa Donnie. The couple had 4 other children, all daughters, and were living in Colorado. Within a few years of having Cody, the couple decided to separate. Cody and his siblings remained in the care of his mother until 1999, when Cody was 6 years old. That year, there were allegations that Lisa had abused the children. She was arrested and jailed for this, which led to losing custody of her children. Cody and his sisters then moved in with their father. Within a few months of Rick Haynes taking custody of the kids, he moved the family to Kittitas, Washington. Kittitas is a very small town located in Kittitas County, which is basically smack dab in the middle of Washington state. The town has under 2,000 people, and the vast majority of the population in this county live in Ellensburg, roughly 15 minutes away. Ellensburg has over 10 times the population, Central Washington University, and not to mention restaurants and a Target store. Rick, a tow truck driver for D&M Towing, had been cohabitating with a woman named Marla Harding. She worked as a social worker. Both of them worked in Ellensburg. Most refer to Marla as the children's stepmother, even though the couple was not married. The family settled into a 2-bedroom apartment above a business in downtown Kittitas. The 4 girls in one room, and Cody and his parents sharing the master bedroom. In 2001, 2 years after having custody of the kids, a call was made to CPS by the principal of Cody's school. In the report, they alleged that Rick and Marla were physically and mentally abusive to the kids and were also neglecting them. A year later, another report was made stating similar reasons. Neither of these reports resulted in a full investigation, and Rick never lost custody. Sometime between 2003 and 2004, Marla was fired from her job as a social worker in Ellensburg. This was noted as, quote, misconduct, which meant she lost all benefits and did not receive unemployment, thus leaving the family fully reliant on Rick's tow truck earnings. At 6:30 p.m. on September 12, 2004, Rick Haynes reported his son Cody as missing. While police opened an investigation, no Amber Alert was issued, likely due to the fact that Rick offered the suggestion that Cody ran away, probably to his mother in Florida. So police began investigating the disappearance of Cody Haynes, and here's what we learned from their interviews with Rick and Marla. At around 8 p.m. the night of September 11, 2004, Cody got into a disagreement with his stepmother. She asked him to do the dishes and put the food away, some of his chores, but he refuses. So as punishment, she makes him sit at the kitchen table for several hours. Sometime around midnight, he's told to go to his room and not come out, and this is the last time his sisters ever see him. His father, Rick, gets home from work around 12 a.m. and does not check on Cody. Instead, he has him continue to stay in his room and leaves the house again around 2:30 a.m. He says it's because he needs to pick up some car parts. A neighbor claims that they were woken up in the early morning because of the Haynes van. It was left running and sitting outside of their shed. This noise woke up the baby, which ultimately woke them up, so they looked out the window and confirmed what they were hearing. When Cody's sisters woke up the next day, there were chairs outside of the master bedroom, the one that Cody shared with his father and stepmother, and there was a note taped to it that said to stay out and that Cody was grounded. This is probably a good place to let you know that it's well documented that there was no door on the master bedroom. So it's just an empty door frame with kitchen chairs in front of it, kind of like in a half circle.
Oh, I don't like any of that.
I know. The girls go on about their day watching movies and ignoring the master bedroom. Their father, Rick, arrives home at 4 p.m. that day. Now, as a reminder, he's been gone looking for car parts for 14 hours. After he arrives home, he and Marla check on Cody for the first time in roughly 18 hours. This is when Rick discovers that Cody's bed appears to have Cody laying in it, but it's just his toys and stuffed animals shaped to make it look like he's asleep. Also missing is a bag and some of his personal belongings. This is when Rick calls 911 to report Cody missing, 2 hours after he arrived home. Police begin looking through the property and locate Cody's bag full of his clothes near the shed where he keeps his bike. His bike is still in the shed, so if Cody did take off, he would have been on foot. This was enough to send up the red flags for police. They begin to question Rick's story. Police ask to interview Cody's sisters, but Rick and Marla refuse. They do learn enough from the interviews with Rick and Marla to make some progress. The couple sat for an interview together, but eventually lawyered up when police suggested conducting separate interviews with each of them. The interview allowed police to glean enough info from them to get Cody's sisters taken from the home and placed in foster care. They learned that Cody was left alone for 18 hours in a room. Their usual discipline rules were that when you were being punished, you couldn't use the bathroom or eat or drink. Once this information was documented, the police chief was able to get the girls out of the apartment a little over a week after Cody's disappearance due to, quote, inappropriate discipline.
I'd be curious how that was being portrayed to the police. If they had any kind of like, oh, we realize now that we're saying this out loud that that's not cool. Or if they're like, this is what we do.
I thought the same thing. And I wondered if they were like being as honest as possible. You know, when it's like stick to the truth as much as you can, right. Whether or not they're hiding something. Maybe they were just being totally honest to try to like buy some leadway or something. I'd be
curious anytime with people like that where it's once you're in that room, you know, when does it click that
you're
wasn't
right.
good?
It makes you think that maybe they realized they were oversharing. They lawyered up because they're like, crap, I might be digging a hole here.
Yeah.
Once the girls were removed from the custody of Rick Haynes, police moved forward with plans to interview them. Initially, they were hesitant to talk to them, but once they were no longer living with their father, they began to tell the story, and what police learned supported their suspicions of Rick Haynes' involvement. According to the eldest sister, the night before Cody, quote, disappeared, he had been severely beaten by his father in the kitchen, and during that beating, he was hit in the head. One sister attempted to check on Cody because he was crying, and their parents told her to stay out of it. The girls continue to hear Cody crying, and then they hear a loud thud, after which Cody's cries stop. Pretty much immediately after this, Rick leaves to go pick up his car parts. Now, Rick did do that drive that night, about 250 miles. He left Kittitas and drove through Topanish and then on to Yakima. At some point, he was in Ritzville, where his vehicle breaks down and he has to call a friend to assist him. The real kicker, though? Rick bought 0 car parts that day. One of the most suspicious parts of this case, and I mean all of it is, but this one really is, police get a warrant to search the Haynes van in early 2005 after they spoke to the sister, but they find out 2 days after Cody had disappeared, Rick had sold his van for parts. There's a lot of questions around this because the police impound initially took the wrong vehicle. They first went and picked up the Suburban rather than the van, which is what Rick was driving in. Now, despite the mix-up, police were able to get most of the van parts back as evidence. But, you know, it was parts by then, and it had been months by then.
It was too late.
A few weeks after Cody's disappearance and the sale of their vehicle, Rick and Marla get married. I mean, what a perfect time, right? So they travel to Yakima, they get married, and many are suspicious of this. They feel like it's to protect each other from giving information to the police. But spousal privilege only protects you against testifying to things that happened while you were married. So anything prior to that is fully up for grabs. That doesn't mean that they weren't doing it under the hope that it would, though.
It sounds like with this group of doofers, yeah, they probably assumed so.
Right. And unless you're well-versed in legalese or have been through it before, I don't think you would know that. Because what we learned from the media is, yeah, if you're married, you can't tattle on each other, or you don't have to.
During all of this, are they even acting like grieving parents or concerned parents?
Oh, we'll get to that.
Oh, okay, good.
Now, if you didn't already think these two were guilty, let me give you some major deja vu. It comes out around this time that the kids are homeschooled. For those of you who listened to my most recent episode, What Happens in the House, the Angela McAnulty case, this is going to sound really familiar. Abusive parents, CPS involvement, homeschooling, you see it, right? So the media catches wind of Rick Haynes, father of 5, didn't participate in the community search for his son. I often say it's hard to judge a parent's reaction to a child being missing, but this one I have a really hard time with. To be honest, I don't think I've ever heard of a situation where a child goes missing and the parents don't help in some way, right? They're either putting up flyers or, setting up a home base for the searchers or creating a phone tip line.
Yeah, I think the judgment comes frequently from the emotional response, thinking you'd be bawling your eyes out, or that parent seems too stoic, so everyone kind of puts, I wouldn't be able to talk. I would look like a statue, or I'd be hysterical, bawling my eyes out. But yeah, I don't think, no matter what the emotional response is, you wouldn't expect a parent looking for a child to just sit back and be like, all right, guys, you take care of it. I don't really care.
Yeah, I agree. His argument for this, though, is that they homeschool their girls so they couldn't participate. And I'm sorry, wouldn't you let your kids maybe take a few days from school if their brother was missing?
Yeah, if you're the ones in charge, you're basically the principal. You could say school's closed for today.
Yeah, it's really hard not to be judgy on this one.
Plus they were, alleged abusers and other things, so.
Okay, so after police have all of this information and the testimony of one of his sisters saying that their parents were physically abusive with Cody the night he goes missing, police get a warrant to search the house and, as I mentioned, take the vehicle. This is in February, 5 months after Cody's disappearance. Even though in court time this doesn't seem like a long time, that's a lot of time. Enough to make sure your car is dismantled and to clean up the house. As for the house, the warrant is specific in saying that it's seeking blood evidence in the kitchen, where Cody's sister claims he was severely beaten and indicated that there would have been a lot of blood. We're finally making progress now in the investigation, right? Well, police are in the apartment and they learn that the floor had been replaced after Cody's disappearance. This was not something that the landlord was aware of or even approved. During the search, a, quote, significant discovery was made, but police did not give any additional information on it since it was active and an open investigation. Continued interviews with the sisters did uncover that all of the children were beaten, many times with objects, one even referencing a chair. This was inflicted by both their father and their stepmother. One of the more disturbing allegations was that sometimes they were beaten when they had a bucket or litter box between their feet. And this was because they were hit so hard that they didn't want to have an accident and dirty the floor. All of the sisters said that Cody, the youngest, got the worst of the abuse. Marla and Rick separated pretty quickly after they were married in 2004. At the beginning of 2005, Rick tried to get a restraining order against the Kittitas Police chief. I imagine they were looking at him pretty heavily, which is probably intimidating, especially in a small town where the police chief probably has little else to investigate outside of their biggest unsolved crime.
That is, we talk frequently about the balls on some of these people.
How dare you investigate me?
To not put in any effort to find your own kid and then to be annoyed at the cop that's looking for your kid and to actually file paperwork. Like, who do you think you are?
I know. Good on the police chief. This was his full-time job until about October of 2005 when the FBI took the case over. Rick remarried in the years after his separation from Marla. He continued to claim that he had nothing to do with the disappearance. And outside of one outburst at a vigil for Cody, one where he claimed that Cody wasn't dead and that they shouldn't be having a vigil for a kid who isn't dead, he had really zero participation in the search for his son. Even more telling of the kind of person he is, he never visited any of his daughters while they were in foster care, even though he could have because he was never arrested. In 2013, Cody's biological mother hired a private investigator to continue to work on Cody's case. This gave a little bit of a nudge on the investigation. In the same year, a special team of cadaver dogs were employed to search for his remains. They located several bones, but it all turned out to be animal bones. Sadly, no new discoveries were added to the case file, even with an investigator and search dogs. In 2019, Rick Haynes passed away at the age of 57. On findagrave.com, you can see a picture of his headstone and as well as two really juicy comments. One is calling him out as a murderer and a monster, and another says that they very much regretted that his son's burial location wasn't tortured out of him before he died.
Wow. Yeah, that is a shame that he died before information could be found. And also, I like that he had adjectives for the husband, but not for father.
Oh, no, there's a oh, yeah,
just
you're right.
father.
I didn't know if the beloved, I know I sat and I looked at that for a while. because it's beloved, period, father, period, brother. So I wondered if the beloved is supposed to be beloved son, beloved father,
everything.
beloved brother.
Also, I wonder how that went when dating, that he got remarried. Like, at what point
in a small
do you go?
town. I don't know if he left, and I don't know if the woman he married was from his town.
But like, don't worry about that cop following us. They just think I killed my kid.
Well, some women might be into that, and I'm guessing she's
true.
the one that picked out this headstone.
Ugh.
And that's where we're at. Nothing new is learned. No blood evidence, nothing. There have been 2 unconfirmed sightings of Cody, but even the majority of his family suspects that he's dead. Both the police and the FBI have labeled this case as a likely homicide. The family is still highly active in the case to this day, which means you can help. His cousin has started a change.org petition to, quote, demand answers for Richard Lee Haynes Jr. A link can be found in our show notes if you'd like to add your name to the over 7,000 signatures.
You know, I bet that's why he died fairly young. They say the stress of keeping a secret can really have a physical toll on you. And even though it sounds like he didn't care, that still was his son.
But I will say this, 2 of them knew. His wife had to have known, even if she didn't do it or vice versa. They knew. And to have 2 people keep a secret is pretty unlikely.
Is she still alive?
Yes. She, I believe, moved from the area, though.
Well, let's call her up.
Cody Haynes has been gone for over 16 years, and he would be 28 years old today. He is Caucasian and has brown hair and blue eyes and a round birthmark on the inside of his right thigh. If you have any information on this case, you're asked to contact the Kittitas Police at 509-925-8534. So one of the things in this case that I found pretty weird is that the neighbors often saw the kids without shoes in the winter, no shoes, no coats. So they would talk about it and they would tell people, yet CPS still didn't do anything.
There's not a lot you could do with that, I would think, because if I called CPS right now and said my neighbors were doing that, that's so easily dismissible as,
but that's
you can't put coats on kids. They're always running out. They're always, like you can't say based off
that with
that.
The principal calling themselves to say this kid is beaten, he's
that's
neglected.
A different story.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like multiple. There were at least 2 callers to CPS plus the neighbors talking to police.
Right.
I mean, by then it was probably too late. But that's just kind of scary that in a tiny town where everyone knows each other, which brings me to another interesting point. The police chief, because it's a small town, he said he knew every child. He didn't know Cody. And the neighbors also said they saw the girls outside all the time, but not Cody. So it's likely he was kept inside a lot of the time, hidden from the town.
Well, and in other cases you've covered where the children are abused or murdered by a parent or family member, so often it is that one kid is the target.
Yes.
So even in this case where all the kids claim to have been abused, he was that kid that got the extra
there was this
bad abuse that it's
There was one sad note from the sister where she said, oh, the stepmom took all 4 girls to the mall and went shopping, and they made Cody, or they didn't, she made Cody stay in the car for hours while they were at the mall, and he had to lay on the floorboard to stay hidden.
That's what I mean. He was maybe like a secret kid. He's homeschooled.
Yeah.
He's the youngest. He's the only boy. Like so many things that could have potentially been seen as them as reasons why or
Yeah.
excuses that, yeah, he could have been this hidden secret child.
It's incredibly sad, and he's
Yeah.
just the most adorable thing. We'll be back with the case of Sky Metalwala after this short break. In 1997, 15-year-old Russian-born and Ukrainian-raised Julia Biryukova met 21-year-old Solomon Metalwala. Solomon, who was born in Pakistan, was well into a successful life here in the U.S., managing his own convenience store. The two met at a service station in Bellevue, Washington, and Solomon promptly asked Julia to accompany him to a party, and that quickly turned into the pair dating. Once Julia had graduated high school and earned her U.S. citizenship, Solomon asked her to move in with him. She agreed and soon after began working with him in his store. By 2003, Solomon proposed to Julia and the two got married. In 2007, the couple had their first child, Miley. After the birth of Miley, Julia began to show signs of obsessive-compulsive disorder, where she would clean for large portions of the day. She also struggled with depression. Solomon started having to leave work early to check on them more and more, even having to feed his daughter since Julia struggled with germs and didn't want to keep food in the house due to fears of cross-contamination. Julia's escalating mental health issues resulted in multiple medications being prescribed to manage her illness. When she became pregnant with their second child, she took herself off of her medication, even though her doctor said it was recommended and safe and urged her to stay on them. Miley was 2 years old when Sky Elijah Metalwala was born on September 6, 2009. Unfortunately, while the family was now complete, they were not a perfect, happy little family. Julia continued to show signs of an escalating mental illness, which put a major stressor on the couple's marriage. To make matters worse, the couple was cited for reckless endangerment of a child. On a very cold day, 27 degrees Fahrenheit, they decided to leave Sky, 2 months old at the time, in their car while they went shopping at Target. The couple agreed to take parenting classes, participate in community service, and spend a year on probation without issue. And once they fulfill these obligations, the case against them for child endangerment would be dropped.
How does one go about leaving their baby in a freezing car?
I know.
And it sounds like they were fairly nonchalant about it.
I don't know if it's like a cultural thing of just, and they come from different cultures, obviously.
Oh, if she's from Russia, she's like, this isn't cold.
Yeah. Or it's just, we're only going to be in there for a few minutes. Like, I feel like a lot of people do that. And it isn't something that they just teach you in birthing class. Like,
right.
So if you're not aware of how children work, I guess I could see it.
Yeah, I had a friend's dog in my car the other day, and I went to go pick up my Chinese food.
I know.
And it was
panic
hot
about
out.
Henry. I'm more
And I
worried
was
he's
like,
going to get stolen.
Oh my God. I stood there staring at the car, being like, making sure
I'm like,
no one
okay,
sees
it's
to think.
65 degrees
Yes.
out. I think you'll be fine for 5 minutes. But
Yes.
it's these stories that, like, what if I lock my keys in the car
Right.
or something? But
And
I think
and that's not the same as people that forget their bait, like all of that where it's accidental and horrific. I can't even think about
but
that
to
without
actively
getting
choose
yeah.
to. And
Without
here's
getting
the thing,
sick,
they have
but
a new
yeah,
baby.
not thinking about it.
Maybe he was not a good sleeper and he had finally fallen, because they did say he was asleep. So maybe they just
Oh.
didn't want to wake him. Like, I have to think,
Just young, dumb parents
Yeah.
being like, it's not hot.
yeah.
So that's not bad. Oof.
By 2010, Julia confided in Solomon that she was having dreams that she was hurting their children. She was still struggling to manage all of her issues, so she was ultimately committed to mental health facilities 3 separate times. Not long after her third stay at a hospital, Solomon filed for divorce. This was in June of 2010. Things grew out of control quickly. Both parents started to campaign against each other for custody. Julia alleged that Solomon had anger issues, controlled her, and was emotionally and physically abusive. Solomon shared his concerns that she wasn't able to appropriately care for the children without his help because she couldn't even care for herself at that point. However, she was evaluated by a psychiatrist and deemed fit to care for her children despite her health history. At this point, the court took Solomon's ability to have contact with his children away, as CPS launched an investigation into the allegations against him made by Julia. While he had his custody temporarily taken away, Julia was granted full custody. Solomon couldn't even have visitation. It took nearly a year, but eventually the allegations were deemed unfounded, and Solomon was no longer prohibited from seeing his children. However, his wife and him were still battling through a divorce. In the fall of 2011, Julia and Solomon agreed that the best course of action was to go into mediation to discuss the custody of their children. An agreement was made after nearly 13 hours in a mediation session on November 4th. Julia would have custody, but Solomon would have visitation. Both parents agreed to this, but 2 days later, tragedy would take place. 2-year-old Sky would go missing. To say this disappearance was suspicious would be an understatement. The day of the disappearance, according to Julia, went a little like this. On November 6, 2011, Sky appeared sick. Julia packed him and his 4-year-old sister into her brother's car, a 1998 Acura, to drive Sky to Overlake Medical Center in Bellevue, Washington, around 8 a.m. During the drive, the car ran out of gas. Choosing not to wait for help on the side of the road, Julia leaves Sky, 2 years old, in his car seat in the car with the doors unlocked. She and her daughter walk a mile to a gas station to get help. Rather than get gas and return to her parked vehicle, she calls a friend who picks her up and takes her back to the car. When she returns, Sky is gone. Julia called police on her friend's phone just before 10 a.m. that day. When they arrived shortly thereafter, they noted that Julia didn't have a gas can with her, which defeats the purpose of having gone to the gas station. She also didn't have a cell phone, a purse, or money. Right away, police begin to investigate Julia as her story seems very off. In addition to there not being a gas can, police realized that the car was not actually out of gas. There were at least 2 gallons of gas in the car. It also appeared to be fully working, no mechanical issues whatsoever. Like any case of a missing child, the police started interviewing the family. Everyone was willing to speak with them, everyone except Julia. While she allowed their search of her vehicle and her apartment, she refused to speak to them directly and insisted that all communication go through a lawyer. She also declined to take part in a polygraph test. Now, in her defense, if you have a lawyer, they're likely going to tell you do not take the polygraph test because it's unreliable. But considering that every single person in the family was willing to have an open conversation to help find Sky, this just made her look even more suspicious.
Just like Cody's dad, where it's like, how do you not do every single thing in your power to get that child back?
About a week after Sky's disappearance, police set up a roadblock near the area that Julia claimed she saw the child last. This was when he was in the back seat of their broken down car on the 2400 block of 112th Avenue. For 5 hours, cars were stopped and interviewed to see if anyone had information. Over a dozen tips were gathered just by doing that. Several witnesses claimed that they saw the car between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., which was roughly the time it was broken down on the side of the road, or broken down, fingers in the air quoting. But everyone said they saw no child, that it was just an empty car. And the way an Acura, I guess, is positioned, you would see the car seat in the back seat and be able to see them through the window. Mm-hmm. And they said, nope, there was no one in there.
And that you would believe because I know if I was driving down a little highway or a little road and I look and if I saw just a child and I saw no one else around, you stop and call for help.
Absolutely. And since they got a wide spread of these witnesses between the hours of 8 and 10, they're leading them to think, I don't think there was a child outside. Police later learned that it was a regular habit of Julia's to leave her 4-year-old and her 2-year-old unsupervised for short periods of time. In fact, while she had full custody of her children and went into mediation with her husband to sort out custody for 13 hours, she had left them alone in the apartment. More shockingly, they also learned that Julia is the only person who had physically seen Sky for roughly 2 weeks prior to the disappearance, meaning that he could have disappeared anytime between October 23rd and November 6th.
This is some real Casey Anthony BS.
While Sky's case was investigated, Miley was put into temporary foster care until about December of that year. During this time, Julia was not able to have any visitation with her. And this wasn't just because she was being investigated, but because she was making really disturbing comments about killing herself in front of her child. By 2012, Solomon and Julia finally divorced, and Solomon was officially granted sole custody of not only their daughter, but of Sky, who is now missing for 4 months.
And did he get custody because of the continued behavior of Julia with leaving the kids and now Sky disappearing?
I think it's everything. I mean, mainly she was leaving the kids and they were building this case against her in this potential investigation. While she was not arrested, she could still have custody,
Right.
but because of the comments and the mental issues, they really thought, no, it's not a good idea. So they granted him that full custody. And by then, he was fully dismissed of any wrongdoing. They believed Julia was making it up.
Oh, okay.
After their divorce, Julia went on to date a married man named Alan Morgan. This relationship was volatile, and there were claims of several incidents of domestic violence. At one point, Alan was arrested for this and consequently earned more jail time after he violated his no-contact order. Even from jail, he harassed her with dozens of phone calls. They did end up getting married, and I'm pretty sure they're married to this day.
Cool.
This wasn't the first time that Alan had issues with the law. Before he and Julia got together, he had already accumulated several CPS calls against him for cruelty toward a child. This was in his previous relationship. He also had charges of domestic violence, drugs, battery and assault, and even violence against the police.
Oh, please tell me they had so many babies.
By 2015, Julia had a child with Alan.
There we go.
And from the moment it was born, CPS worked to get custody of the baby. Clearly, they were unfit parents. Alan was eventually arrested, and neither parent was able to get custody, and the child is now being raised by Julia's mother. Solomon and Miley live a happy life together, and while she doesn't have real memories of her brother, Solomon regularly speaks about Sky and how he hopes he can see him someday. As the case stands now, there are, of course, theories, but they all revolve around Sky's mother, Julia. Theory 1 is that she gave her son to family in the Ukraine and that he's still alive somewhere outside of the U.S. Theory 2 is that she killed Sky and cleaned up after it using her OCD cleaning skills so no one would ever know. We know 4-year-old Miley was questioned and she claims Sky was in the car that day, but most feel like her mother pressured her to say that. And while Julia does have ties to the Ukraine, police do not believe that Sky left Washington, and they don't believe he was even in that car that day. Overall, the search for Sky has incurred over 14,000 hours of searching, millions of dollars spent, and 2,500 tips followed up on. Many people tried to find out what happened to little Sky, spending hours upon hours helping in the investigation, but we still don't know. But we do know one person who does, and that's Julia Beryukova, a.k.a. Julia Morgan. Sky Metalwala has been gone for over 9 years and would be 11 years old today. He has black hair and brown eyes. He's biracial, having both Ukrainian and Pakistani descent. If you have any information on what happened to Sky, please contact the Bellevue Police Department at 425-577-5656. Okay, so I have to tell you one creepy thing that I did not put in the script. But 2 weeks prior to Sky's disappearance, there was an episode of SVU titled Missing Pieces. Now, this is about a woman who leaves her baby in the car and it ends up getting stolen with the baby inside. She calls police and eventually they figure out she was making it all up. The baby actually died from SIDS and she was covering it up. So, of course, this fuels the fire that Julia likely killed Sky at some point in that 2-week span and then was just making this all up to have some sort of abduction story.
Yeah. I mean, that's possible. The idea of her sending him to the Ukraine seems totally outlandish. That was so soon after 9/11. You can't just send a baby that age on a plane by themselves. So you would have had so much documentation of who went and passports.
Figured that out if that did happen.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
I feel like that would have been
with...
debunked immediately. So that I put no faith in that theory. Yeah, it's just
there is the thought that maybe she, and this crossed my mind, maybe she gave him to human traffickers. Now hear me out on this. I wonder, did the police check her bank statements? Because if there was a spike in funds, that would kind of allude to her selling him off. But I really do think she killed him.
Yeah, that also seems complicated. Like, because then you get into stereotypical stuff of like, oh, she's an immigrant. Oh, she's from Russia. So she probably has ties. Like, everyone in Russia knows a sex trafficker.
I just went through every storyline it could possibly be to like.
So it's like, okay, so you have someone who has talked about concerns about hurting their child and has been neglectful to their child and shown concerning behaviors. I think it's Occam's razor. You know, it's like the easiest.
But where is he then? And that's what's hard. It's like, is he buried? Is he in the water? Now, they did find a toddler shoe not far from where she claims he was in the car, but it turned out not to be his. They were able to track down, I think, who it belonged to. But
is the dad still involved as far as trying to keep his name out there or searching?
He does articles every once in a while, and I have reached out to him, and I'm hopeful that maybe he'll want to chat with us. Because he does do interviews once in a while. I did go on his Facebook, and some of it's private. He's very religious. I don't know if he was religious prior to this or if this kind of
leaned into it after.
But he seems like a decent guy that, you know, tried to stick it out with someone with mental health issues, and it wore on him. Yeah. And then this happened. Let's assume she did kill Sky.
Right.
This is very reminiscent of the Help Me episode where it's like, okay, filicide, which is the, you know, a parent murdering their child ages 1 to 17.
Right.
It falls into these different categories. So there's this idea of altruistic, which is either you think your kid's in a better place or you have suicidal ideation. You want to kill yourself and your kid because you don't want them going on.
That makes me think of like the moms with the bathtub. What's her name in Texas? Where she was like, no, it's bad and there's evil in the world. I'm saving our children.
Well, that's a different type, which is like a psychotic break.
Oh, yeah.
So but she kind of falls in both categories, I'd say, because yes, and that's one thought I had is this just a psychotic break where you kill your child and there was no reason for it?
Right.
Or you thought, you know, your voices were telling you that this kid was bad, which was in the case you're talking about. But then there's also the concept of that punishing your ex that you brought up earlier.
Right.
Was this because she was so pissed she was going to have to give her ex visitation?
But it's also like, why would she be? Because she seemed, from what you said, it sounded like she had potential to be maybe overwhelmed by motherhood, especially 2 young kids.
Which is another type,
yeah, exactly. So wouldn't you be more interested in the custody sharing so that you don't have that?
And then what about the daughter?
Burdened?
Was she more bonded with the daughter? Is that why she was fine? Why spend all that time coaching your daughter to say the son was in the car?
Again, just like the last case, there's always that one kid that for whatever reason is the target in abuse. But it sounds pretty flat out that she had 2 weeks. Who knows what she did in that time? I mean, 2 weeks to dispose. I'm sorry to talk like this. 2 weeks to dispose of a very small body.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be that difficult.
Yeah, you have all that time.
And no one's looking. And the
husband isn't seeing them. So she doesn't have to worry about that kind of timeline.
And like, she's just going through life. And that Rick guy from the first story, he just went through life. How many people do we cross paths with? You know, they say, oh, you passed 7 serial killers in your life or whatever. But how many people are like suspects or a person of interest or these cases? Like, if I were a homicide detective, these cases where it's like just out of reach, where you know the answer.
You know they're on to them. Yeah, but they cannot prove it. But you can't do anything. Have the details.
That would make me lose it.
On that note, I want to leave you with a couple other facts to mull over. According to the Journal of Forensic Science, filicide happens about 500 times per year. That's 5 times more often than a child gets abducted by a stranger, and 10 times more likely than a child gets abducted by a stranger and murdered by a stranger. Nearly 73% of filicide cases involve children 6 years or younger. I mentioned in the beginning of this episode that I'm unsure of effective programs for children missing under mysterious circumstances, and it seems more often than not in these types of cases, we seem to be able to have valid arguments against CPS, where calls were made and nothing seems to happen. Or we're reliant on a doctor evaluation to help gauge the level of risk a child is at with their own parent. Unfortunately, there are far too many of these cases, and you can tell that from just our podcast catalog alone, not to mention the hundreds of similar cases we have yet to cover. There are organizations who help, and I know I've mentioned it before, but I urge you, if you can, to join us in making a donation to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They were created in 1984, and since its introduction, have received 5 million calls and have helped recover over 300,000 children. If you can't make a donation, another way you can help is by sharing the donation link with others. A link to donate will be found in our show notes. Was that too choppy or was it okay?
No, that was good.
Okay, because I was struggling. Isn't that the saddest? It's like we know who did it, but we can't just arrest people.
I mean, it just really makes you think, not just parent to child, but how many cases and how many people are just that one piece of evidence away from being in jail for murdering someone. Yeah. And right now they're just living their lives. You hear, I mean, look at Golden State Killer. He was out for forever just living his life.
It's really hard to know that these people get away with it and have an entire life of memories and things to look forward to after they killed their child.
Mm-hmm. And that's, again, why we do this, why we do True Crime Tuesday, because it is that one thing. Maybe one person knows one thing about either of these cases and calls it in. And then
even
it's like,
if that's not the
done.
case, maybe they recognize this behavior and they're one CPS call away from saving these kids' lives.
Yeah.
Police. They're the Russian police.
Police.
That are here to help.
Hello, we are here to solve your case.
We got vodka.
We are the police.
Involvement of Rick. After the birth, jewelry.
I can't ever write that word.
I know.
Every time I work, I'm like, oh my God.
I had miswritten Julia as Julie, so that's why I thought of it just now.
Jewelria.
To be fair, I have not practiced this portion because I was in that goddamn meeting for so long on a Sunday. God's day. The couple agreed to take parroting cat. Oh my God.
Are you saying parroting?
You know what she sounds like?
Teach you how to
I know.
No.
Well, no, you guys will be shocked. I did that one time and the look on your faces. Remember when I almost did that whole mini without a mistake? Still to this day, I dream about it.
Murder in the Rain is produced and edited by Josh McCullough. Written and hosted by Emily Rowney and Alicia Holland. Artwork by Jamie Costa. Music by Kai Pfeiffer at kyfifer.com. Check out our website, murderintherain.com, for additional information on all cases, a fun interactive map, and be sure to subscribe so you can receive our newsletter. Check out the Mad Props page for coupon codes from some of our sponsors. We love your reviews and seeing them on all streaming platforms, especially iTunes. And check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And suck my balls.
Please put that in.